This session, as we spoke about, is called the Legacy of the 2020 State Election Challenges. Legacy is probably not a good word to use because this legacy has not run its course yet. It is still evolving, as we'll learn in a few minutes. From the moment the 2020 election was declared, as you will recall, state election officials were thrust into the eye of a hurricane. And for some, including our two guests here today, that storm has yet to pass. Meagan Wolfe remains the bipartisan Wisconsin election administrator, despite an effort to remove her just days ago. And I want to take a moment to thank her publicly for being here today. It would be easy for her not to honor the invitation that was extended, and given the circumstances that she's facing. And so I really appreciate that. I think we all do. So thank you very, very much. And we are looking forward to a discussion about how you maintain the integrity of an election that is a year away, given the circumstances that you face. On her right is Gabriel Sterling. He is the Chief Operating Officer for the Georgia Secretary of State's office, who has testified before the Fulton County Grand Jury and the Special House January 6th Committee that investigated election fraud. But you might recognize him more from a particularly fraught moment in the aftermath of the 2020 election, as emotions continued to build toward January 6th. But seriously, a month later, the same things that he was speaking about on the stairs that day in Atlanta would come to pass on January 6th. So I will leave it with our guests today to open it up, to talk about their view of the landscape as they see it now. And then, as always, we'll go to your questions. And I hope you've come with many. So thanks very much. And thank you to our guests.
You got notes, so.
Okay, well, so thank you, everybody. So I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to be here with you. My name is Meagan Wolfe. I'm the administrator of the State of Wisconsin Elections Commission, and I'm actually the only chief election official. So every state has a chief election official. In 40 states, there's a secretary of state who's elected, who's partisan, that's in charge of elections. In 10 other states, like ours in Wisconsin, we have another form of administering elections. And here we have a bipartisan commission, and I serve as the chief election official for the state of Wisconsin. But I'm the only one in the entire country that the law requires be nonpartisan. So myself and all of my staff in my office, we have to be nonpartisan, and the law defines that a couple of different ways. We can't have worked in a partisan office or held partisan office, and we can't have given a political contribution. And I think it's really, really interesting how we run elections here, and has a lot of benefits because we do have a bipartisan commission, and whenever they meet, so anytime more than 2 commissioners want to have a conversation about something, they have to have a public meeting. And so my job is to research things for them, work with my staff and my attorneys to prepare materials for them, and then they deliberate those decisions in an open meeting, and you can actually go back and see exactly what they discussed, how they came to the decision that they did. And so I think it offers a lot of openness and transparency in that model. One of the really challenging things about that model is I think people have this tendency to want to blame one person, right? They want somebody that's accountable for a decision that they don't like. And so oftentimes, even though I don't have a vote on my commission, I find myself as that person, right? I find myself as that scapegoat where people want to say, we're upset with the decision that was made as it pertains to Wisconsin elections. It's Meagan's fault. And I think 2020, we certainly were dealing with these concerns about, people who really felt like something had gone wrong, that the election had been taken from them. But those things have really stuck around, and it's been really frightening, honestly, to see how much influence that still has here. And I think what happened last week with my position, it's a complicated matter, so I don't want to dive into it too much because folks may have been following along. But basically, because again, I have that bipartisan commission, right? I have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. They've been chosen, my commissioners, by their respective legislative leadership. We need 4 votes of the commission to do anything. So that for them to take any kind of action, they need 4 votes. It has to happen in a bipartisan way. When my commission was deciding whether or not to reappoint me as their administrator who serves at their will, the 3 Republicans said, yes, we want to reappoint you. We're going to submit your name to the state Senate for confirmation. The 3 Democratic members said, we don't have to do that. We're going to abstain. We don't think there is actually a vote here for us to take because of a recent state Supreme Court decision called the Prane case that said in appointed positions you get to hold over, and there isn't an opportunity to reappoint unless there's a vacancy as defined under law. And so we were left with a situation where I had 3 commissioners that feel that I have an appointment that's now before the state Senate that they can choose to take action on, and 3 commissioners that don't believe that that's lawful and don't believe that they need to go through that process again. And so the Senate chose to take up a resolution a few weeks ago where they passed a resolution that said they consider 3 votes to be a majority vote of the commission. And they decided—
I went to UGA. That's not how math works.
It's not how math works, yeah. And so it's been, it's been really interesting to watch how this is all played out. And I think probably, pertinent to this subject at hand today, one of the things that really struck me is through that process. So after that resolution was passed, the Senate's committee that oversees elections, they had a public hearing. And I went back to my commission and I said, what should I do, right? They're having this public hearing. They're saying that they have my confirmation in their hands. I serve at your will. Should I go to that hearing? Should I not go to that hearing? I need your direction. And they said, we're not going to give you our direction. You figure it out. And so I knew I was going to have 3 commissioners that were going to be very upset if I went and 3 that were going to be very upset if I didn't go. I ultimately didn't go, and I didn't go because the legislature's own attorneys, the Legislative Council, had put out a memo that said they didn't believe my appointment was lawfully in front of the Senate. And so that was another nonpartisan source that I was able to look to say, is this something proper for me to engage in? The Attorney General for the state also put out a very strongly worded letter that said he did not believe it was lawful. So anyway, they had the hearing, and at that hearing, it was pretty much the who's who of folks that have been harassing and bullying election officials in the state of Wisconsin for the last 3 years. And they still exercise an incredible amount of pull over our state legislature. There were a lot of theories that were presented as part of that hearing where the people that spoke out against me were perpetuating the same theories that have been litigated, that have been investigated, that have been proven to be false through recounts that have been conducted here. Those folks continue to perpetuate those falsehoods at this hearing. And as a result of that hearing, the committee chose to send on my nomination to the full Senate for rejection, which they indeed did. And many of them cited that hearing and hearing from those individuals that came with the testimony to that public hearing. They cited that as the reason that they were rejecting or firing me. And so I think it just really goes to show that the challenges we were dealing with in 2020, a lot of the same narrative that Gabe was speaking about, that is still continuing today. That still continues to be such a major part of what we're dealing with still as election officials. And it's played out in a couple of different ways. One, we're still seeing just a tremendous amount of litigation related to elections. We just had a court decision last week or the week before where the use of the National Voter Registration Form, a form that had been approved and in use since 1994 in the state of Wisconsin, was challenged. And we just had to send out a memo this week telling clerks they can no longer accept that national form. And so, there continues to be a lot of litigation that really looks to challenge so many processes. And that isn't to disparage that litigation. There could be some points to that, and certainly that's the ruling of the court, and so I don't mean to disparage that. But there's just so much of it, and it continues to be every element of elections that is challenged, and it makes it really difficult for us as election administrators to put out any kind of guidance. My job is to provide guidance and information to our local election officials. We have more than any other state here in the state of Wisconsin. We have 1,850 city, town, and village clerks that run elections. Most other states might have 50 to 100. How many do you have?
159.
Yeah, so we have 1,850, which is a pretty unique model. And when we can't give them guidance, or when we're afraid that we're going to get sued if we put out information, then those 1,850 clerks, they don't know what to do, right? They're not going to know, and there's not going to be consistency around our state. And so in a lot of ways, that's a real tactic. We see a lot of pro se litigation where individuals are representing themselves. And frankly, it seems like it is nothing more than a design to disrupt the process, to make it so it's more challenging for us to put out that type of guidance. We also see just an avalanche of open records requests. Open records requests are important. They're a good part of government, right? I think it's something we all embrace and understand. We need to be transparent. In Wisconsin, we do. That we need to be transparent about how we're operating. That said, I do believe there's such a thing as a malicious open records request, or people that will put through hundreds of them, or they'll put through these requests that are so broad that it would take our agency to a screeching halt if we were to focus all of our energy on just that. And each state's laws are a little different. Ours are pretty open, and so we don't have a lot of opportunities to deny those. Our agency went from an agency with one attorney to right now we have 3 full-time attorneys and 2 legal clerks, so a total of 5 on our legal team. And that's really what they're working on is open records request, because the volume continues to climb and climb and climb, and the requests are more and more and more broad. And so that's really been something that's been incredibly challenging for us to deal with. We see a lot of administrative complaints. So we have a law that says you can come to the commission first before you go to court to settle disputes related to elections. And we continue to see many of those. And some of them are challenging the same things over and over again that have already been settled in court or already been settled in previous complaints. So all that to say, the folks that are submitting a lot of that, not all of it, but there's certainly valid complaints, records requests, litigation in there. There absolutely is. But there is also all this extra that we've never had before. And pair that with things like, what's happening with my position, the distractions to local election officials, or in state election officials, where we're still so focused on 2020 and needing to overcome these challenges that it makes us less prepared as we head into next year. I've been in elections administration for 12 years, and this is the first time before a general election or a presidential election where I've felt like we have not had the time we needed to make the preparations that we need to make. So be that training of our election officials, be that fortifying the cybersecurity of our systems, we just haven't had those same opportunities because every day we walk into a new challenge that still relates to the 2020 election. I was talking to one of my staff today, and they were saying, oh my gosh, the 2020 2024 election cycle has, started. We're already seeing things like nomination papers. And I said, that's true. Unfortunately, the 2020 election hasn't ended yet, and we're still dealing with that at the same time. And so it really has impacted our ability to be able to address some of the things or focus on some of the things that we normally would at this point in the election cycle. So, that's just a few ways that some of the challenges continue to impact us here in the state of Wisconsin.
And what Meagan outlined is a tactical and strategic plan. I've just essentially decided that I go around the country. I've been in Colorado, in California, in Michigan, Maryland, DC. I mean, it's everywhere. And there's advantages to the decentralized nature of the way we run elections. Like the states don't run elections. The counties or the townships or the villages do. And the problem, we have 159. You have 1,801.
50.
80-20 rule applies. There's 20% of dumbasses running elections, and they're going to do something stupid. And then what's going to happen is the people with bad intentions say, see, that's the fraud right there, that mistake, that error. And if you ever want to see a good example of how these things go, just go to my Twitter feed and see responses to when I post something about barbecue. There'll be a lot of things about, is that a Dominion barbecue you use? You get three barbecue butts out of that or not? They will go through these same things over and over again, and it's a mixed bag. There are 100% people who in their heart of hearts know that it's cheated. We know it was cheated. We saw it on television. The president told me, and they believe it. You can show them evidence after evidence after evidence, and they can intellectually see it. They will never accept it. They will never accept it. I was talking to Maya last night. For Republicans, and I feel like I'm like the sole Republican on the panel in the 4-day period, so I can say some of these things, but there's a predisposition for my team to believe Democrats cheat because we have about 100 years of history of Democrats cheating. LBJ stole his election for Senate. There's pretty much general acceptance that JFK stole his election in Illinois, and they went to Nixon and said, if you complain about this, you're done in politics forever. And he said, you know what, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to take my fair and square stolen election and eat it, and I'll come back in 8 years. That is part of the reason they will feed into it. There's another angle on this that, as I've said this publicly before, the reason that Donald Trump focused on Ruby Freeman and Fulton County is because there's a racial angle I can play on this one. It's going to feed to people's own, biases and their own racism in many places, which is a terrible thing to admit that exists, but it does, and he played it. And he played it really hard, and he overplayed his hand, I think, which made a group of people not believe it. No matter how much evidence we show, we were able to do some things. We had to literally hand count 5 million ballots in 5 days. And that kind of shut down the machine slipping votes thing. Because when we did it, it was at 0.1052% off from the number of ballots cast and 0.0099% off on the margin, which essentially showed the machines counted the ballots as cast. And the problem that Meagan sees, and that I see, and that elections administrators in Colorado see, and this is my fun part. Louisiana. Trump won Louisiana by like 30 freaking points or whatever the hell it was. There are still people that are claiming parts of it were stolen and demanding that they investigate things and change out from Dominion voting systems because they've had Dominion voting systems there for 20 years. It doesn't make logical sense, which makes it that much more difficult for local reporters to explain in a rational way what's happening. And the problem is the people who need to see it are never going to see what you write. They're not reading what y'all are giving out. You know what they do? We've done polling on this. The majority of Republican primary voters will go to Fox News. They'll turn it on at 9 a.m. when they get up and turn it off at 10 when they go to bed. The second most thing they watch is local news, which would be local television. I said there's one television from Kentucky. There you are. So you have the most advantage to be able to talk to them potentially. But you still have to lay the foundation and prep the field. You have to get the real information out there so that those family members out there who have these discussions at Thanksgiving and at Christmas and at New Year's and football games and stuff have it available to them. It needs to be done. But on the open records thing, I was only half kidding about it. Yes, of course, we'd have open records. But it is malicious. It is intentional. It is designed to make our people make mistakes. It is designed to say, like one of the things that I've seen out there, they say, in Fulton County, which is, and Maya can back me up, this Fulton County screws up everything. They're just giant. Every state has the big giant county that screws up everything. All the time. You can name it in Alabama, it's Jackson County, or Birmingham is. Everybody's state has some locality that is, they're so large, they screw up stuff because they're so large. Again, the 80-20 rule applies. If you have 100 employees, 20 to 10 of them are going to be stupid, and they're going to do stupid things. Fulton County literally had guys shredding voter registrations because they didn't want to scan them. It's the same amount of work, but they chose to shred them, which is a violation of federal law and state law. And those guys got prosecuted. But they do stupid stuff. So one of the things they did was they didn't sign properly some chain of custody stuff. So the people over here said, none of those ballots count. I'm like, no, you don't disenfranchise people because a clerk was an idiot. That's not how voting works. And this is what I will admit, I have an argument with some of my own people on my own team. The state of Georgia, and let me first, Meagan is viewed as a leader in elections around the country. I'm going to say that real quick before I said, you can blush, it's all right. She really is. We have really great state election administrators who really care about their job. And whenever you raise your hand, nobody went to school other than our state elections director, Blake Evans. He went to Auburn, which has a great election system there. They got a master's in public administration in elections. So he's the only person who actually went to school to be an elections director. Everybody else kind of fell into it. Nobody signed up. They started as a volunteer somewhere. They were good at it. They gave them more responsibilities, and the next thing they know, they're an elections director in a county or a city, or then they end up being in the state because they care a lot. They want it to work. The whole system doesn't work unless you have that. But like Georgia, this is the fun part. When I argue with my lieutenant governor, who hates the Secretary of State, he just really does. He just got elected, and he didn't expect to be sitting there with the Secretary Raffensperger. But they think they might run against each other in the future, so he's trying to pick fights constantly. But when we are going through this stuff, our people do a good job. Almost every election administrator in the country does a good job. We are viewed as a model in the country. Heritage Foundation, that right-wing group, has us as either number 1 or number 2 in election integrity. The Bipartisan Policy Coalition, which is a left-wing group, has us as a number 1 in following all their elections guidelines. Who knows, other than you, what percent of eligible voters are registered in Georgia in 2020? 98%. 98% of eligible people were registered in Georgia. We did polling after the 2020 and the 2022 election. What percent were happy with their voting process? 98%. Yet Stacey Abrams and the left attack us constantly for voter suppression. Constantly. We're still in lawsuits now. This is the fun part. There was a lawsuit that was done in 2017 after the special election where John Ossoff, now Senator John Ossoff, lost to Karen Handel for a congressional race. This is now, we're in 2023, it's been 6 years. It's in front of Judge Totenberg in federal court to get rid of, before we had what they called DRE machines. There was no ballots. It was an electronic recording of your votes. But then we got BMDs, and she just allowed them to amend their complaint. And in those complaints that filed with Stacey Abrams, the machines are flipping votes. Does that sound familiar to anybody? People on the left and people on the right, you are weaponizing these systems. They're weaponizing lawsuits. Says, I have an affidavit. I have a lawsuit that says this. And then it gets covered, and we talked about earlier the headlines, what they mean. Lawsuit filed claiming flip votes. Lawsuit filed claiming suppression. Lawsuit filed claiming fraud. The incentives to lie, the incentives to be as obnoxious as you can are way up here, and the downsides of lying are way down here. Marjorie Taylor Greene raises more money than the Speaker of the House. Does that make any sense in a regular operating world? No, it doesn't. But we live in this environment that's going to stay this way because the rewards on all sides of that. And this is, I get accused of both sides, and it's because I'm seeing it from the long-term view. Joe Biden came to my state when we were passing SB 202, which was the voter integrity law, which has 95% written by Brad Raffensperger in our office. It was a good election administration bill. But Joe Biden came to our state and said, these guys are doing Jim Crow 2.0, and if you do it, you're like Bull Connor and George Wallace. Does that help lower the temperature? Does that help the debate? No, all it does is raise the temperature and raise the fire. So you know what the other side does? Fire back at them. I have a long-term view on this. I think this all started in 1986 with Judge Bork, but that's neither here nor there. The reality is this is what we're dealing with. We have to deal with the lies constantly. It's the same stuff. Like Megan said, it gets recycled. It is whack-a-mole with the same crap. I mean, I remember I did a press conference the day before the runoff election in January where I was literally debunking the same things that had been said for the previous 2 months. Guess what? It's 2023. I just checked an old email of mine, and this is not me complaining, this is me saying what's happening out there, still getting the death threats. That was Friday. Now, on the good side, I'm sure Megan sees this too. I have people see me in grocery stores. I just went down to, what's that? The train, Main, what is Main something?
Train.
A little, yeah, there's a little, Main Depot, this little hole in the wall bar, kind of like Manuel's in Atlanta. And 2 people there recognized me. Now, one of them was a former Democrat chairman and state senator, so I kind of gave him a pass. But the majority of Americans believe in the system. The majority of Americans have faith in the system. The majority of Americans want it all to work. And there's a weird dichotomy we have as elections officials. We always want high turnout, kind of. Because you know when the turnout's really high? When everybody's pissed off. If everybody's walking around angry and pissed off, you have really high turnouts. And what some of my Republican friends can't understand is how did Joe Biden get 80 million votes plus? More than Barack Obama, the savior of the universe. I said, because Donald Trump really pissed off people and got them to show up. This is not hard, guys. As much as you love him, they hate him. That's how this works. And both sides are going to base politics. When I was coming up through the 80s and 90s, it used to be the base over here and the base over here. Let's try to go to the middle to get the rest of them. That's gone. You don't do that anymore. You said, I'm going to fire up the hell of my base and said, I'm going to make you hate that other guy so much that you're going to have to vote for me. And that's what they do. And it basically is if that guy wins, they're going to set your family on fire. If that woman wins, she's going to set your family on fire. So which one do you believe more? And that's what it comes down to. So it's very difficult out there. It's really difficult, and I can guarantee the same thing. We have all lost a lot of our local elections people who had knowledge of how to make things work that could calm people down and were embedded in their community. And we've all had to replace them. Our secretary put in a system where people could volunteer from an internet site, and we gave 60,000 leads to counties around the state, the vast majority of metro Atlanta. We try to basically tell the truth, follow the law, and execute good, fair elections, and get elections. This is the interesting thing. The thing that makes people believe the outcomes of elections the most is the speed with which the results are put out there. All the polling shows that. So in states like Wisconsin and Georgia, we're screwed because it's too close to get the final results out there. We're always going to be the eye of the storm of the close elections. Now, Wisconsin more than Georgia. For Georgia, we're in a weird place in Georgia. Basically, in the runoff, when the 2 Republican senators lost, they were running on an agenda that basically said, the secretary should resign, and you shouldn't trust the voting in the system. Please get out and vote. That is not a good sales pitch, and it didn't work. But we all live in this, and we stew in it. And we go to NAS, or NASED, which is National Association of Secretaries of State and National Association of State Elections Directors. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, black, white, rich, poor, big county, small county, we're all dealing with the same crap. Yeah. All of us. And y'all are the ones who have to tell everybody about the crap we're dealing with. So, and it's hard. Elections are hard. You know what most people think elections are? I go vote, I go turn on my TV, it's done. Elections, we're dealing with 2024 stuff right now. And we're dealing with municipals. I don't know if y'all have municipals in odd-numbered years or not.
Well, we have every spring, so starting in February is all of our locals.
And we have our PPP, the President's Preference Primary, coming on March right after Super Tuesday. And we are also piloting a new software because from that lawsuit I mentioned earlier, there's this researcher who in Pennsylvania was thrown out as an expert, a guy named Alex Halderman, who told Jill Stein she needed to fight the vote and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And he came out and said, George said, this is so insecure as to be unconstitutional. And we're having to fight that. And there are good researchers. There are people of good intent. And there are bad researchers and people of bad intent. I put a lot of these people into the bad intent category, even if they started in the good intent category, because I'm famous now. This is where I get notice from. This is what I'm looked to, I'm listened to. And I want to ascribe good motives to most people. Nobody's ever the villain in their own story. It's really hard to justify that. So when I deal with people, I try to come at them where they are. And it's hard. I've got relatives to this day I have to have hard conversations with. I know you, Gabe, I love you. I know you didn't do anything. And I said, okay, so I'm either in on it or I'm stupid. So which one is it you want it to be? But that's what we all have to deal with. And it's not easy. And we've been talking for a while, so I want to go and let Kevin get some questions out there.
I wish you would really tell us how you feel, because I'm beginning to wonder. No, if this is a good point to open it up for questions. So.
Well, for the record, I'm a highly partisan Republican, just for the record, okay?
And you went to Georgia, University of Georgia?
Of course I did. By the way, University of Georgia, 2 national champions back to back. I'm not sure everybody knew that or not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Haley B. Miller. I'm a reporter with the USA Today Network in Ohio. My favorite wonky election topic to talk about right now is Eric. Ohio left Eric, and we're now apparently partaking in individual agreements with other states who have also left Eric. I'm wondering to what extent you guys see this as a trickle-down effect of the 2020 election, and do you anticipate more stuff like this coming down the pipeline that's like, because it's really boring and hard to convey to voters the significance of it, and I just wonder if there are going to be more changes at this really technical level that have a much bigger meaning than the average person is aware of.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I am the ERIC director for the state of Wisconsin. So every state that's in ERIC has a director, a voting member. And I also served as the chair of ERIC right after the 2020 elections. And oh my gosh, I mean, you know, if you would have told me before 2020 that ERIC was going to be the target of conspiracy theories, I would have said you're out of your mind. This is the most, you know, boring, mundane thing you can imagine. It's states exchanging data in a very, very secure, encrypted fashion so that we can compare for differences and use that information for whoever makes the decisions. Here in Wisconsin, we'd use those comparisons to then give it to our locals. They still get to make a decision, right? Is this the same person? Have they actually moved? It's just basically a way to get more data to keep our voter rolls up to date and clean. Prior to 2020, we were getting sued from the left, saying that ERIC could lead to us removing too many people from the voter list. And then after 2020, all of a sudden, there were all these theories that ERIC just simply was something that it is not. I still, to this day, get people claiming that ERIC is managing our voter list. Like they think it's some type of vendor that comes in and is able to deactivate records or create voter registration records. Nothing could be further from the truth. One of my favorite conspiracies, tall tales about me and ERIC was, for a while there was a group that said that ERIC pays me as the chair of it, and I was given Barack Obama's office in Chicago as the chairwoman of ERIC. And
I thought you were dating Eric. That's what
yeah,
you know.
it's a long commute, but I figure it out. So, you know, just really bizarre stuff that was circulating about ERIC, and still to this day. But, you know, I think your larger question is an important one. Is this foreshadowing for other things? Absolutely. There has been a concerted effort to disattach election officials from our network, be it people we rely on for technical expertise, be it the federal government, CISA, Homeland Security, some of these other entities. On any given day, you can see these partners getting pulled into these conspiratorial narratives and these efforts to really villainize us working with anyone and trying to isolate us so that we're not able to utilize that expertise from, you know, even our other election officials. There have been efforts to even disconnect us from one another. Every email we send to each other, to a local, somebody might request that as a public record and then try to represent it as something it's not. And so I think what's happening with ERIC, while that's sort of been the really sensational sort of one to watch, because it really did go from this very mundane thing that nobody was paying attention to something that has now, you know, there's all these claims that it's doing all sorts of things that it's not. that same sort of thing is happening, I think, with all of our other organizations and networks that we rely on. There's even laws being passed in some states. There were bills here that said that we weren't allowed to work with any third parties on, basically anything. There's some states where it's outlawed to talk to anybody else about elections. So to talk to a vendor, to talk to, another government entity. And so I think what's happening with Eric is absolutely something that could happen, is happening with other entities we rely on.
She's right. But the original answer, too, was 100% politics. If you look at nearly every person from each state that pulled out, ironically, almost all of them are running for higher office. I don't know how that happened. But literally, if you go back and play things that they said in like February or January of this year, of how great Eric is. And it was really funny. I think it was in Florida and in Ohio. They sent out press releases on the day they withdrew from Eric, bragging about a multi-state voting prosecution. Guess where they got the data from to do the multi-state voting prosecution? Eric. It's the only place you can get it.
Yeah.
There's no other way to get it other than Eric.
Yeah.
Georgia uses it to manage our lists. We just sent out, following the NVRA, although Wisconsin has the advantage of being a NVRA exempt state because they have same-day voter registration, which is terrible, by the way. But we sent out 82,000 mailings to people and said, basically, looks like you registered in their state. Please sign this and send it back because the NVRA requires a wet signature from the voter themselves. Even if we have 100% verification that they have gone to another state and registered in another state, we can't remove them. The NVRA was passed in the 90s, pre-wide use of the internet and data management. This 90-day window of time to manage your voter lists and stuff makes it very difficult to do real list maintenance. And list maintenance is not about purging voters. I swear to God, I wanted to get up and yell at the AG this morning. He was talking about purging voters. You're canceling records. So in every state in the union, just about how many ballots you have to have on site, how many machines you have to deploy is all based on this. This is resources. This is for counties and cities to spend money or not spend money. This is a way to properly identify people who have moved. List maintenance is important to run really good elections, and I encourage all of y'all to read the Center for Election Innovation and Research reports on this. The cleaner your lists, the less likely you are to have fraud claims, the less likely you are to have conspiracy theorists, and the more you can save money for locals to actually focus on running elections properly and paying more money to have good people on site. That's what it's really about, and it gets into the weeds. Election administration is, in and of itself, after 2020, there was a t-shirt that made up that had a quote from me. It said, "Let's make elections boring again." It's really hard. They're already very boring, but these conspiracy theories are great. I mean, Italian space lasers that are coming through and changing data literally through, where's one of those AC control valves, AC control things. I mean, that's literally the level of craziness. And all of our parents and grandparents don't believe everything you read on the internet, and now they all do. So we all have to deal with it. And the politics is coming down, and it will affect everything. And Megan was absolutely right. I think, again, as a tactical, strategic maneuver to isolate people, to take them away from their support networks, so we can't share data, we can't share information, we can't do the things to make elections better for everybody. And we fight, Megan can tell you, Blake Evans, our elections director, he's our Eric rep, and Secretary Raffensperger and I have been in public basically saying, y'all are idiots for leaving Eric. This is the best thing you could possibly do for election administration. And the reality of it is you're doing it for politics, and we know you're doing it for politics. Stop saying you're not. Center for Election Innovation and Research. This is David Becker's group, who, by the way, was the center of some of those same conspiracy theories. And since he's Jewish and George Soros is Jewish, it's obviously a horrible conspiracy theory because George Soros funded Eric, which he never did, but that's what they say. The reality is it's difficult to do. There are MOUs in place for states, and we're talking to some of them for bilateral too, because all I care about is the data. I want the data from everybody so we can have really clean lists. They haven't really done anything yet. Alabama's done one exchange with Tennessee so far, but actually doing the real stuff and comparing DDS records and having enough. There was a thing called Kansas Crosscheck before, and I'm going to simplify this. You can take data and have, let's say there's 12 points of verification on somebody, and Eric would look at, if it's not 10 or above, that's not a match. As Crosscheck would do 4, first initial, first name, birth year, last name. That's a very, very weak kind of match. It's also the kind of thing that Trump and his team did for their thing, saying that there were 66,000 people in Georgia who were underage who voted, because they were intentionally trying to grow the numbers. And it's like, I don't know how it's going to work yet. We are trying to negotiate. We want to keep them on the rails. And I think in some of these cases, they're going to say they got these MOUs, and actually executing the data sharing, it's not easy. How many years did it take Eric to put everything together to where it actually worked and was safe?
Oh, it's been more than a decade at this point.
Yeah, of actually learning from it and doing it. And it even took 4 years from the initial concept to launch to get the first 6 states. And it was 3 Republican states and 3 Democrat states to start. So we still have Utah, South Carolina, Georgia. I'm trying to think who else is Republican in the thing now. But I know at least those are still there. They still have pressure, South Carolina especially, to leave.
Hi, I'm a reporter with the Associated Press in Minnesota. My name's Trisha Ahmed, and you both mentioned how these malicious attacks are kind of designed to create mistakes further down in the next election. So I'm just wondering what your plan is to mitigate that. What's going to happen?
Right. Well, I think in some ways, a state like Wisconsin, I can only speak for ourselves here, is we're set up to have a lot of resiliency because we have so many locals. Even in good times, so even before 2020, we had about a third of our local election officials that would change over every year. When you average that out, that was 12 new election officials every week, or 1 or 2 every single day, right? And so we're always used to sort of this turnover that we experience here in Wisconsin, and having to get clerks up and running really fast in their communities. And so I think, have there been distractions? Yes. A lot of the distractions, though, have been more for myself and my staff and some of the things that we do at the state level. At the local level, I actually feel really good about where they were and the training and the resources that we built in. I could spend a whole day just talking about what we've done for them for cybersecurity. Imagine in those, we have 1,200 townships that each run their own elections. They're given nothing. A lot of them don't even have an office. A lot of them don't have a computer that's provided by their local jurisdiction. So we've done a lot to get them all to a baseline. And so I think we are all at and above that baseline as we head into next year. Are there things I would have liked to have done this year that we didn't get to because of all the distractions? Absolutely. But I still think we're at a really good place, and we're able to quickly get those election officials up to speed for next year. Yeah, I would have liked to have done more work in terms of like clerk committees or feedback committees with even local groups to look at things like manuals, training, processes, and how can we make them better. We do a lot of work like that where it's like bring people in and let's see how they actually use a product that we put together. Let's test it and let's see where we can make it even better. I would have liked to have done a ton of that. I'm a huge believer in data-driven improvements, and you need time though to collect that type of data. And so that's probably one of the things I wish we could have done more on, is really get a better sense of what is working for people, both in messaging for the public and training for our clerks, what's working, what's not working, and using data to drive programs that we developed for next year. And we just didn't have time to do a lot of that.
Hey, I'm Blair from the Daily Montanan in Helena, Montana. So I've been this has been one of my beats for about 7 years now in Colorado, now Montana. And I'm just curious, after covering Tina Peters and special election integrity committees and all of this, and seeing what you guys have done over the years, what do you feel the end goal of these people who claim all of this stuff's so messed up when every county clerk and election administrator says that everything's fine? What's the end goal? I mean, beyond trying to score short-term political points. And
chaos.
Where does that lead, I guess?
Chaos. No, that's the intention. The intention is to basically, coming out of 2020, all it was a sloppy tip drill. Keep the ball alive. If I can keep the ball alive, I can run the clock out on certification, I can run the clock out things, I can get past the courts. Keep the ball alive is all they're trying to do. Now a lot of it is so tribal, they feel like they have to. They feel like that they're just, I don't have a good answer for it other than I've talked to some elected officials and some even party officials who say the biggest applause lines I've ever gotten in my life is when I talk about stolen election. And that's their goal. If you talk to a lot of elected officials, they'll never admit this. I'm a recovering one, so I can say this. They all want to be loved. They all want to be respected. And when you get that level of adulation, it's almost intoxicating. I mean, that's a weird thing to say, but that's part of what it is. And it's the same thing, I'm sure, and again, I'm going to have both sides, for Stacey Abrams making the claims about suppression. She talked about these 58,000 people who were in limbo, who couldn't vote. The reality was they could show up with their driver's license and vote. And one of those 58,000 was Jesus Christ from Heaven Street, spelled with an I. I mean, it works because it gets to the emotional gut of voters. Democracy, the republic. Everybody on all sides is fighting for fair play and the democracy. How do you fight with somebody who that's their underlying feeling? And that's the reality we have to deal with. These are not necessarily bad people. There are 100% grifters who are bad people. I'll put Rudy Giuliani in that one, okay? He's trying to make money and do the grift and do what he can. There are people who listen to him who are not bad. And it's hard to be in the position to save souls and run elections at the same time.
Just a real quick add to that, the grifting angle. So if you look at, some of these folks that continue to disparage me and try to, use me as I'm the reason for all the problems in elections, they'll make these outrageous claims about me or about Wisconsin elections, and then at the end of the post it'll say, so donate here. So we can continue to do this work. There's one particular person right now who's saying, I'm filing complaints with sheriffs around the state. We're going to throw Meagan Wolfe in jail. You want that to happen sooner? You want me to file in more states? Give me money, and we can speed this effort up. And so I think that is a huge part of it, that people have found that this is a way for them to raise money. It's a scam that they're running, and so that is definitely a factor of this.
Hannah Wiley with the LA Times. I find this fascinating. I wish we had the rest of the day with you. This is great. Thank you.
We can boot the other
so
guys
much.
off. It's fine.
I just have so many questions. You two are in the center of the storm. I have to ask, so much of the nation is watching the Trump case in Georgia. And I'm really curious to hear, as someone whose office, that's the heart of the case, can you tell me your thoughts on this case? And I have to ask, and maybe you've said this publicly before, and forgive me, I'm a Statehouse reporter, but were you in the room when the former president asked the Secretary of State to find those 11,000-something votes?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second part first. So on the Saturday of the call, I was talking to my boss, Deputy Fuchs, and we're talking about all the crap going on, blah, blah, blah. And then she said, oh, I got to go. What's up? We're getting on the phone call. We're going to a phone call with the president. I'm like, wait, what? Click. And for about 18 hours, I was irate. I was like, I should be on that damn call. Those people don't know anything. And so I was so pissed. And then the next day on Sunday, when the call got to the Washington Post and I listened to it on my computer, I yelled at my computer. My wife can tell you, I was yelling at the computer. And then I thought, I'm so glad I wasn't on that call. Because listening to it there, and I did find out later on that Chief of Staff Meadows told my boss, it might be best if Mr. Sterling doesn't join us. So I was like, okay, at least the president doesn't like me. I get that. But it's still a weird thing to listen to that, and know that actually occurred. Now, on the second part, there was a little indictment in our state of 19 different people. I probably can't comment too much on it because I'm likely one of the 150 witnesses to come in. And what's tough for me as just a person, I have dedicated essentially my entire life. Since I was 15, I volunteered for a Republican campaign on the re-election of Mac Mattingly in 1986. I'm 52, I have gray hair now. And to then have to go into the face of people who I've known. I was best man at somebody's wedding, and we haven't talked barely. He came to my father's funeral. I appreciated that. And we worked together for years, and we haven't talked. I've got people, again, who I see at the dry cleaner in my own neighborhood who are a little cold now, who used to. One of my favorites was there was a woman who was a Republican activist, so I was at a bar, and I was sitting down. It's been a long day. I got a drink. I see her pull her phone out and take a picture. I'm like, great. So we're still Facebook friends. So she puts on Facebook, what do you do when you're sitting next to the devil?
Ooh.
So I was like, huh. So I made it how, I went out of my way. So good to see you. I won't say her name. You have a great night now. So it's been weird. But again, on the good side, I'm sure Meagan gets this too. I go to the Publix. I go to the restaurants around town. I go and I'm thanked. And what's really sad for me, thank you for telling the truth and doing your job. I'm like, is that the freaking bar now? Telling the truth and following the law, if that's the bar, we have a more fundamental problem overall in the United States. And secondary to that, we have some systemic problems. Like, it looks like we're likely about to nominate Donald J. Trump and Joseph R. Biden. And it's similar to me, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. The major parties of 200 years of history in this country are literally nominating the only two human beings who might lose to the other one. If either one of them nominated somebody who was 50 and had an IQ above 90, they would win. I mean, that's kind of where, but the system is it's screwed up. The system doesn't work right. They did things to get to a nominee as fast as they can, which means you have a minority-based nominee, and then that situation you deal with. One of the things that the Democrats did through doing a lot of these indictments, especially the Alvin Bragg one, by him going first, it undermined everything else to try to do accountability for President Trump. Because that was a stretch. Even like legal analysts from the left were like, well, they're really kind of shoehorning this in and getting around the statute of limitations and that kind of, I mean, it was a stretch. And that undermined everything else. And you know what happened the day after that? They made him a martyr, and he shot to first in polls. That's when he leapfrogged DeSantis. So was it a tactic on the Democrat side to do that? Maybe. I don't know. But I can't answer too much on the other, so I apologize.
Okay,
but it's weird being the center of the universe. You're right.
I'm going to try to sneak in something real quick then. Like, what do you think of some of these Democratic states trying to remove, or Democrats trying to remove Trump from the ballot, alleging, that his alleged crimes on January 6th and are, disqualify him from being on the ballot?
The biggest word in that statement is alleged. If it hasn't been adjudicated by anybody, the idea, and this is another really weird thing for me. I was on CNN talking about this, and they played Lawrence Tribe from Harvard University and his opinion of the 14th Amendment. I'm a political junkie. I've been hearing about Lawrence Tribe since I was 15 years old. And they're like, University of Georgia graduate who took 6 years for your undergrad. What do you say about what Lawrence Tribe has to say? It was really bizarre. But they're claiming it's self-executing. There's no way in the world, the founders said, random Secretary of State, you can use your own judgment to do that. And if they did, what's going to happen next time is Barack Obama said he had a phone and a pen. If somebody does anything that's like, if they don't defend a law, like oftentimes the Obama administration didn't do, the Biden administration, they're not following the Constitution. Therefore, they're committing insurrection. Therefore, I'm not going to put them on the ballot. It's always this. One side did this, the other side did this, then the other side did this. It's the same thing with the filibuster in the Senate. When they started with just federal judges, and Mitch McConnell said, if you do this, you're not going to like the outcome. We're going to tell you what's going to happen. In 1986, when they decided, we're going to go past just deciding if they are qualified by their body of work, we're going to know what their views on the issues are, and that's when we started going sideways in the Supreme Court. It just escalates and escalates, and each side blames the other, and there's no grown-up in the room to say, knock it off. And there's no incentive for American voters almost. They'll claim they want it, but because we're at this base politics now, I hate that guy more than I hate that guy, so I guess I have to vote for the lesser of two evils. And that's kind of what, there's nobody pressing the brakes. And earlier on, the AG, something I absolutely agreed with, you have to defend the institutions. The institutions are there for a purpose, to bolster us in these situations. The institutions held in 2020 because there are individuals that were there who stood and said, I'm not letting this get past me. So it's difficult, but that's kind of where we are.
Hi, Raga Justin. I'm a reporter with the Times-Union in Albany. I was curious about the sort of voter expansion or voter suffrage efforts like absentee ballots and same-day voter registration, and expanding the types of IDs that are allowed, when you go to vote, to like student IDs, for example. I feel like those efforts in New York and everywhere have been seized on by either party. They either hate it or they want it. And I'm just curious from the sort of boring governmental administrative perspective, what those efforts look like when they are successful. Does it create problems for you guys, or do you appreciate them as a way to get more voters onto the rolls? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I feel like we do take heat sometimes as election administrators for sort of not. Our focus isn't necessary. Our focus isn't and can't be on how do we get certain people to the polls, right? Our job is to implement the law as it's written. We're not the lawmakers. I'm not the lawmaker. I can't. That would be totally inappropriate for me to do. And so my job is to implement those things. So I don't take a position on sort of, is this change or this court decision, is that good or is that bad for turnout or for democracy or for whatever it might be. That's really not my branch of government, right? My job is to implement it. And so what I would say to that end is we need time. Sometimes what happens, and we saw this a lot in 2020, is these things are handed down when an active election is already happening. So there's already an active election in place. So before a federal election, ballots go out 47 days or more before those elections here in the state of Wisconsin. Some places they might go out 60 days before the election. And we'll see challenges to processes, expansion of some of these things, limitations of some of these things close to an election. And then what happens is that people don't utilize them correctly. They're not implemented well in local jurisdictions. And so, if those are for the politicians to fight about and sort out, what's best in terms of policy on those things. But what we ask for, at least here, is enough time to implement it well. Because if we can't implement it well, whatever it might be, then it will end up being something that causes confusion, that's going to cause challenges after and during an election that could ultimately end up disenfranchising somebody because their clerk didn't follow the right process or the voter didn't know the right process to follow.
Like Megan's words, enduring an election. I'm just glad to see New York is catching up with Georgia on voter access because they were so far behind us. Like they only had early voting starting this last time. We've had it for 15 years. We've had absentee without excuse for 15 years. And what I think, and this goes again to both sides, trying to change election laws to affect the outcome is a complete waste of energy and time. Almost every report and analysis we've seen doesn't really change outcomes when you move the things around voter ID, same-day registration, absentee ballot access. They very rarely do. And the people who thinks that they do are doing a disservice to themselves. And I've argued with some of my own Republican colleagues and friends. I said, look, I want everybody to show up and you win with your ideas. You win or lose on the ideas. You don't win or lose by picking out, who's going to get access to the ballot or not. At the same time, you have to have rules so it's a fair play for everybody. And like Mark Elias is a menace. He's trying to do things to extend, because he thinks it's going to help Democrats extend the time absentee ballots can be returned, when the best practice is they have to be returned by a date certain and everybody knows what it is so you can get to the final outcome of elections. Get rid of having the timestamp on them, because they are deemed as having been mailed in time if they come in no matter when. And the same way, people trying to say if you don't register if you move within the state, like county to county, there's people now claiming, well, somebody moved from Fulton County to DeKalb County, they cast illegal votes. No, they didn't. They didn't lose their franchise because they moved 8 blocks down the street. So people trying to jerry-rig the system to achieve outcomes is wrong. What they should be doing is set the rules early. And fortunately, the 11th Circuit, which covers Georgia, nearly 100% of the time, if we're within 3 or 4 months of an election, they don't. It's no preliminary injunctions. We'll deal with this after this next election. So we were lucky on that front. I don't know if your local federal circuit is not.
Lucky.
Okay.
We're not even sort of lucky. I mean, if you remember in 2020, we didn't know if we were going to have an election in April of 2020 until the night before the election, and some of the rules that were going to go along with that. So.
Well, I feel like the Grim Reaper again to close down a great discussion that could go on for quite a while. But what I would urge and suggested and is really true is to follow up. And I believe we could follow up with Riley if we could at some point, because the whole idea of this is to make connections and will not abuse you too much, and Gabriel as well, to be people that folks can rely on in the future to talk over some things and get the perspective that you laid out here today that was so valuable. So thank you very, very much for coming.
And let me say one thing to close out. I want to thank all of y'all because your beats are viewed by some people as boring sometimes. I know they're super exciting because they're interesting and the dramas and the intrigues and the effect on people's lives. The states and the localities have much more impact on people's lives than whoever's sitting in the White House and who's sitting in the Senate, who's sitting in the House. But those get all the coverage. The real deal is down where y'all are. So I appreciate the work that y'all do.